is not able to singularly and explicitly condemn anti-Semitism.
The U.S. withdrawing all American diplomatic staff from Venezuela as the country spirals into chaos.
Right now, it looks like 15 Republican senators have misgivings about the emergency declaration.
A Utah teacher publicly apologizes for making a student wash an Ash Wednesday cross off his forehead.
I had no idea it was a religious symbol.
We're talking about our climate, the existential threat of global warming. So I will now make it official. Meatless Mondays will be in effect, and we are proud of that.
For Friday during Lent. It's one of those
Which
things.
is the tradition.
It is indeed. Hey, by the way, happy birthday to the internet. 30 years ago today, Sir Tim Berners-Lee of Boston is credited with inventing the internet, even though some have suggested that it was Al Gore.
Al Gore suggested that.
Well, not accurate.
Well, by the way, he does not like the direction of the internet that he made. He does not like the direction. He says we're in a bad place when it comes to the internet. And I think if we could all agree, we could start over again. Let's wipe out all of our histories, and let's try to do it right now.
Maybe that hurricane that you were talking about a little while ago would wipe it all out.
Only the internet. I would love it to clean up.
All right. Meanwhile, let's talk a little bit about what is going on in the news and down in Washington, D.C. There's still a lot of back and forth over some of the comments made by freshman Congresswoman Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, a Democrat. You know, the moderates really helped the Democrats take control of the House, but now the Democrat Party is being defined by the extreme members, Rahm Emanuel writes today in The Atlantic. And particularly what has got so many people going is the fact that this woman over the last couple of weeks has made some anti-Semitic comments, and then it looked as if they were going to have an anti-Semitic resolution with her name in it, but then they got talked out of that. Her name wasn't in it, and then it became an anti-hate resolution.
Well, and then the president said that's ridiculous. They should. He was very disappointed they didn't include her name in the resolution and thought it was very watered down.
Right. And I think that's pretty clear that Steny Hoyer amongst the leadership who says there's more than 3 new people in Congress. We have over 60. So that question came up with Sarah Sanders yesterday. She actually had a back and forth because she had a press conference yesterday because the acting OMB director wanted to introduce his budget, and then she took some random questions. Let's listen.
Does the president really believe Democrats hate Jews?
Look, the president's been an unwavering and committed ally to Israel and the Jewish people. And frankly, the remarks that have been made by a number of Democrats and failed to be called out by Democrat leadership is frankly abhorrent, and it's sad.
Does he think Democrats hate Jewish people, as he said on the South Lawn?
I think that they've had a lot of opportunities over the last few weeks to condemn some abhorrent comments. I'm trying to answer. If you'd stop talking, I'll finish my statement.
Yeah, sure.
The president has had and laid out clearly his position on this matter. Democrats have had a number of opportunities to condemn specific comments and have refused to do that. That's a question, frankly, I think you should ask Democrats what their position is, since they're unwilling to call this what it is and call it out by name and take actual action.
What the president told reporters last Friday was that the Democrats have become an anti-Israel party. He said they become an anti-Jewish party, and that's too bad, the president said.
And some of those reporters were saying, does the president really believe that only Democrats hate Jews?
Meanwhile, late last on Friday, Politico has a magazine, and they interviewed Congresswoman Omar, where she was talking sweepingly about where she sees the state of politics today. And she had something really disparaging, I thought, to say about President Obama. If you use the quote, and if I read it out loud, maybe you'll agree. Quote, hope and change offered by Barack Obama was a mirage. And Omar says, quote, we don't want anybody to get away with murder because they are polished. We want to recognize the actual policies that are behind the pretty face and the smile. I don't know if you could take that 2 ways. That, to me, is a disparaging comment on President Obama, saying really there's no difference between President Obama and President Trump in her mind.
Well, here's the thing. She said that the Politico reporter misquoted her. And then the tape was out there, and it completely supported the Politico reporter's particular report. She deleted the tweet, but then yesterday a Fox News producer had all sorts of questions for her, And listen to what she says about Presidents Obama and President Trump.
Do you think that President Obama is the same as President Trump?
Absolutely not. That is silly to even think and equate the two. One is human, the other is real.
Is it true that
One is human. So I guess she's saying one of those two men is not human.
It's not human. She did tell Politico, she said Obama administration was responsible for the caging of children at the U.S.-Mexico border and the droning of countries around the world, but then later said that reporter distorted her words.
Although it's on tape and it didn't. So she finds, I find myself, we're doing a lot of talking points on stuff she tweeted, stuff she said, stuff she wrote, and her apologies, and then the walk back of the apologies and the refusal to admit it was an apology. And guess what else is not happening? Democrats' agenda's not moving forward. The House doesn't look like it's on the same page. The Speaker's been marginalized. The Speaker, who was categorized as so strong, so tough, now is basically part of the background noise because of 3 freshmen.
Well, I tell you what, we had a guest on about an hour ago who said it was very clear Linda Sarsour, the co-founder of the Women's March, was taking credit for mobilizing a lot of progressives. And in fact, 637 signatures went onto a petition asking Nancy Pelosi not to particularly name Omar in the resolution and to make it more about hate rather than specify anti-Semitism.
Here's a story that didn't get a lot of coverage. We talked about it last Wednesday or last Thursday, I guess, because Ash Wednesday was on Wednesday. This child in Utah went to church with his family and got the ashes and says a teacher made him remove the ashes. Listen to this.
The teacher walked over and said, like, what is that? And I was like, it's Ash Wednesday and I'm Catholic, it's first day of Lent. He was like, no, it's inappropriate, go take it off. She gave me a de-infection wipe, whatever they're called, and she made me wipe it off. I wiped it off in front of all my friends in the corner. And it was like, why did she wipe it off? I was like, I don't know, she just made me.
Yeah, well, yesterday out there in Utah, Mona Patterson had a press conference to explain that she did not, and there she is right there, she thought it was just dirt. She didn't understand it was a religious symbol, she said. Here she is.
Centered. I had no idea it was a religious symbol. When I learned it was a sacred symbol for Ash Wednesday, I immediately apologized to the boy and his family. My entire life has been centered around respecting diversity. I would never, ever intentionally disrespect any religion or any sacred symbol. It was a total misunderstanding.
Yeah. In fairness to her, Ash Wednesday just started a few years ago. Well, I mean, it's just one of those new holidays.
She's been on administrative leave since that incident occurred.
Right. And the young man said that at the time before, she said, you got to wipe it off. He said, there's this religious observance. This is part of the Ash Wednesday thing. He told her that a number of times. Apparently, this young man's grandmother doesn't want her fired, but at the same time doesn't apparently believe the story. She said, quote, it's kind of hard to swallow a little for me. There needs to be a lot of training for all religions and all beliefs. So they understand.
What a great lesson for the kid to watch a teacher go up there and say something that they know blatantly is not true. The 4th grader says, I told her what it was, and she just made me go in the corner and wipe it off. Well, they're concerned that she fights grime, dirt and grime, like she's a member of the Tide Foundation. Are you kidding me?
Well, she said she thought it was dirt, didn't realize it was religious.
Right. Just caught her by surprise. This Ash Wednesday thing just popped out of the blue.
You know what? In her defense, though, he did tell her. He should have been able to have it on there. Right. But this is in Utah. If you read all the articles, they say 2/3 of that state are Mormons. So maybe she didn't know. I mean, it has been around for a very long time.
I know.
Thousands of years.
It's just one of these things. It's just catching on now.
But we grew up, New York, there's so many Catholics here. You see everyone walk around with the ashes. Down in the South, you do too. Maybe in Utah, maybe she didn't know.
Yeah, a lot of places on Earth have Ash Wednesday.
Well, now she knows.
Right.
And she apologized.
Right.
So in the act of forgiveness, can we move on and allow her to keep her job?
Let us pray. Hey, Jillian.
Brian, I'm just sitting over here. Okay. Brian, I appreciate that. Thank you for humoring me for a second. Let's start with this Fox News alert. We are just learning a decorated military veteran is one of 8 Americans killed in the Ethiopian Airlines crash that we've been telling you about. This is Army Captain Antoine Lewis, among the 157 people killed when the Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet went down minutes after takeoff. A family friend says he was a valued member of the community.
I was devastated, shocked and devastated. This is a member of this community and he's family. He was a humanitarian, a faith-driven man.
The American hero was in Ethiopia doing missionary work. He leaves behind a wife and 15-year-old son. The FAA is refusing to ground the model planes in the U.S. despite other nations doing so. An American crew is in Ethiopia to investigate. Memorial services begin today for a sheriff's deputy murdered in Illinois. Deputy Jacob Keltner was gunned down while trying to serve an arrest warrant at a Rockford hotel. Accused killer Floyd Brown appeared in court for the first time. A judge denied him bond, claiming he's a flight risk. Brown could face the death penalty. Deputy Keltner spent 13 years on the force and leaves behind a wife and 2 sons. The UK Parliament is hours away from debating and voting on a revised Brexit deal, 2 weeks before it's set to leave the EU. Prime Minister Theresa May and European Union leaders agreeing on a last-minute change to the divorce deal overnight. Parliament is expected to vote at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. If this critical vote fails, Brexit could be delayed or the UK could leave with no deal. NBA star Russell Westbrook gets in a heated exchange with a fan during a game. Watch this.
I swear to God. You and your wife.
Wow, did you hear that? The Oklahoma City Thunder star later called that an emotional response to disrespectful comments during a Utah Jazz game. The fan claims he did not say anything inappropriate. Russell Westbrook obviously claims something else, so...
I totally take his side. You could hear her say something totally inappropriate. Why these people think because they pay a lot of money for tickets, they can treat these people terribly is unbelievable.
He said,
and he's got a great track record.
He claims that what they said was racial and inappropriate. So That's what he said.
I would say inappropriate, but you'll hear it if you listen to the clip back. You'll hear the fan totally wrong. Meanwhile, thank you, Jillian. 12 minutes after the hour, the Senate is about to vote on a measure blocking President Trump's emergency declaration. Senator Josh Hawley plans to vote no. He's here to explain why. That'll be next.
And Faith on Ice, the underwater cross that
All right, President Trump is pressing the Senate as they prep to vote on a measure against his national emergency at the border, tweeting this. Republican senators have a very easy vote this week. It'll be Thursday. It is about border security and the wall, stopping crime, drugs, etc., not constitutionality and precedent. It is an 80% positive issue. The Dems are 100% united, as usual, on a 20% issue. Open borders and crime get tough Republicans. Meanwhile, our next guest is planning to vote no. GOP Senator Josh Hawley sits on the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. He thinks the president is right on this. Senator, you're a former attorney general. You know the Constitution. So many other Republicans, at least 4, say this is not constitutionally okay. Why are you on board with the president?
Well, look, first of all, we have a crisis at the border, Brian, and it's clear to anybody who's looked at the situation. Congress has heard testimony on this over and over. We have a smuggling crisis. We have a humanitarian crisis. We have a drug crisis. We have a law enforcement crisis, number one. Number two, Congress has given the president this authority. In 1976, Congress passed a law that gave the president the ability to declare a national emergency. So it's a pretty simple question. Is this an emergency or not? Because Congress has said he can declare a national emergency. This clearly is an emergency. That's why I'll be voting no against the Democrats and yes with the president.
But you're not going to get every Republican. You've lost at least 4. You could lose as many as 10. Why? Why are you not on the same page? Why is your party not on the same page?
You know, I can't speak for other senators, but I know there are some who think that this is. I think some people don't understand actually the situation. Some people think that the president is saying that he has some inherent authority to do this. They don't realize that Congress has actually passed a law that has been invoked. I think it's 56 or 58 times by other presidents. I mean, there's lots of precedent here. Right. It's been invoked for stuff like overseas elections. I mean, our own national security on our own border is definitely a national emergency. If that isn't, I don't know what is.
Here's Senator Schumer. He doesn't know what is. Listen.
The Founding Fathers' exquisite balance of power is now being attempted to be undone by President Trump. Members of both parties should come together and say no.
And Senator Rand Paul agrees with Schumer. Listen to this.
Wanting to fund something that Congress wouldn't give you the money for, I think really doesn't, this is a long-standing problem. And people say, well, you're saying there's no emergency. No, I think there is a problem at the border. But we have to do it in a way that's consistent with the Constitution.
So both of them are wrong in what way?
Yeah, I mean, they're totally wrong. I mean, first of all, I didn't hear Chuck Schumer objecting when President Obama invoked the same statute. I didn't hear him objecting when President Clinton invoked this same statute numerous times, by the way. And Senator Paul is right that there is a dispute over funding here. That's Congress's fault. Congress did not give the president the money that is needed to secure the border. But look, other presidents have invoked this same statute in funding disputes. President Reagan invoked this same statute in a funding dispute with Congress. So if you don't like the statute, repeal the statute. But that's not the question in front of us.
It looks like Senator, the president's going to have to use his veto because not enough people agree with you on the right. Senator Josh Hawley, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, straight ahead, Senator Elizabeth Warren fighting with Facebook, why the social media giant is backtracking after deleting her campaign ads. Plus, Democrats slammed for not doing enough to condemn Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitic comments. Now some Jewish millennials are fed up and leaving the party. The leader of that movement is here live next. Please take notes. First, 560. That's how many suspected criminals were rounded up in a massive operation in Latin America. Interpol says that includes members of MS-13. Agents recovered more than 850 guns, 20 grenades in the raid. Next, 750. That's how many undocumented immigrants were taken into custody trying to cross the border in Arizona. That was just this weekend. The majority of them are families from Central America. That section of the border has seen a 230% increase in family apprehensions this year. Oh, but we don't have an emergency. There's no crisis. And finally, $77 million. That's how much cocaine ICE found in New Jersey, where Steve lives. It's the biggest cocaine bust in nearly 25 years. The Fed seizing 3,200 pounds of the drug found in crates of fruit. The shipment was from Colombia. I'm out of words.
All right, Brian, thank you.
President Trump slamming the Democrats for failing to take tougher action against Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitic remarks.
The Democrats have become an anti-Israel party. They've become an anti-Jewish party.
And a group of Jewish millennials called Jexodus agrees. They are encouraging Jewish Americans to walk away from the Democratic Party.
The group says, quote, we reject the hypocrisy, anti-Americanism, and anti-Semitism of the rising far left. Progressive Democrats and far too many old-school Jewish organizations take our support for granted. Here with more on the movement is former Trump campaign staffer and Jexodus spokesperson, Elizabeth Pipko. Elizabeth, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start at the beginning. Jexodus means what?
Obviously, it's a play on Exodus, but we left Egypt and now we're leaving the Democratic Party.
Why did you decide to do this and start this movement?
I thought it was time. Obviously, we saw a lot of anti-Israel policies kind of start under the Obama administration, and it got worse and worse, and clearly we've seen it. It's been plastered on our TV screens the last month. There's anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party. They can hide it. They can do whatever they want. They failed to condemn it, and now it's there, so it's time.
Elizabeth, how much does this hurt the Democratic Party, the fact that it sounded like we were going to have a resolution voted on in the floor, non-binding, perhaps with Congresswoman Omar's name on it, and then at the 11th hour, because of all the pressure from the party's left, they wound up not naming her, and it was not about anti-Semitism, it was just generally about hate across the board.
I mean, the scariest part, obviously, was not the original anti-Semitism. It was the lack of leadership coming into play when they were supposed to come into play, condemn what happened, and they failed. Mm-hmm. So not only did the anti-Semitism that started with Ilhan Omar get worse and worse, by proving that she had supporters in her own party, but when the leadership fails to condemn that, it shows that they are a party of anti-Semitism. The president said it the other day. That's what's happening, and they can't deny it anymore.
Now, Elizabeth, we were talking about this attracting millennials, but is this for everyone? Do you encourage anyone who is Jewish and has voted Democratic their entire lives, and now you're asking them to join your movement and do what? Vote Republican now?
So anyone that's Jewish, but also anyone at all that feels that they've been told not to vote according to their own conscience and beliefs. There have been so many people that told me that they were pressured into voting a different way or not voting at all or made fun of for what they value. So anyone that feels that they haven't gotten to vote according to what they believe in, I think it's time for that person to stand up and do, what needs to be done in 2020.
Well, in 2016, let's take a look at the results. Hillary Clinton wound up with 71% of the Jewish vote, and Donald Trump got about a quarter. Do you see that changing in the next election, the ratio between the Republican and the Democrat?
So we're obviously very realistic, but we're also optimistic. Under President Trump, literally anything can happen. But also we know that the Democrats are currently helping us out. I mean, they're proving our point. They don't care about Israel. They don't care about the Jewish people. And the Jewish people need to show them that if they don't support us, we're not going to support them. So we know, obviously, that the Jews have overwhelmingly supported Democrats, but that doesn't mean that the Jewish vote should be discounted.
Why is that when you hear the president talk about his pro-Israel stance and meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu?
I have no idea. Honestly, I've never understood it. After the president moved the embassy, which so many presidents, including President Obama and Bush, promised to do that, I thought that there would be a shift. Obviously, I thought people would at least understand, like Jewish friends of mine would understand why I supported him, who didn't at first. And they didn't. They never changed their mind. They stuck to the narrative, President Trump is bad, and they refused to change that.
What are they saying now?
Same thing. I don't think they're going to change.
Your group, Jexodus, has been in business for 2 weeks. I understand you've got big events planned for New York and Florida, right?
Yeah, so that's our official launch. Will be April in New York and Florida, but we're hoping to go across the country through 2020. We know there's a big Jewish population in multiple states. There's also swing states, which we do not want to discount, obviously. We know it's come down to a few thousand or a few hundred votes in past elections. So we're going to get people excited and, just galvanize Jews across the country to do what matters for them in 2020.
Jexodus.org for more information.
Yes.
All right. Elizabeth Pepko, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
The Trump administration launching a new crackdown on disability scammers. Why you should think twice before posting about it on social media.
Yeah, good idea. And AOC is pushing her GND, Green New Deal, to stop climate change. But the co-founder of Greenpeace just had some comments that she probably doesn't like. He's going to join us to explain them coming up next.
Oh, it's unrealistic. Oh, it's vague. Oh, it doesn't address this little minute thing. And I'm like, you try. You do it. Right. Because you're not. Because you're not. So until you do it, I'm the boss. That's How about that?
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sending a message to critics of the Green New Deal. But that didn't sit well with some, including the co-founder of the environmentalist group Greenpeace.
Patrick Moore is tweeting this. Pompous little twit. You don't have a plan to grow food for 8 billion people without fossil fuels or get the food into the cities? Horses? Question mark. If fossil fuels were banned, every tree in the world would be cut down for fuel for cooking and heating. You would bring about mass death. Close quote.
Patrick Moore is also the author of Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, the making of a sensible environmentalist, and he joins us right now live from our nation's capital. Patrick, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Okay, it sounds like you don't think her plan is a good one. What's your major
problem? You're the one.
With it?
Well, it's a silly plan. That's why I suggested she was a pompous little twit. Twit meaning silly in the British lexicon, and pompous meaning arrogant. And she really rubbed me the wrong way when she said she's the boss, because she can make up a proposal that's completely ridiculous and no one else did. And that is what's wrong about this. In fact, the whole climate crisis, as they call it, is not only fake news, it's fake science. There is no climate crisis. There is weather and climate all around the world. And in fact, carbon dioxide is the main building block of all life. That's where the carbon comes from in carbon-based life, which is all life on land and in the sea. And not only that, a little bit of warming would not be a bad thing for myself being a Canadian, and the people in Russia wouldn't mind a little couple of degrees warmer either.
But Patrick, there are so many scientists who have come out and have said that climate change is real.
Yes, of course climate change is real. It's been happening since the beginning of time. But it's not dangerous, and it's not made by people. Climate change is a perfectly natural phenomenon, and this modern warm period actually began about 300 years ago when that little ice age began to come to an end. There is nothing to be afraid of, and that's all they're doing is instilling fear. Most of the scientists who are saying it's a crisis are on perpetual government grants. On one hand, they say the science is settled and people like myself should just shut up because they know what's right. On the other hand, they seem to keep studying it forever as if there's something new to find out. And those two things are completely contradictory. Carbon dioxide is actually a benefit to the world. I'm in Washington this week for a directors meeting of the CO2 Coalition, whose purpose, and you should take a look at the CO2 Coalition online because we have some of the top scientists in the United States and Canada on board, and we believe that carbon dioxide is entirely beneficial to both the environment, to agriculture and forestry, and to the climate of the earth.
Patrick, I know you were president of Greenpeace in Canada, 7 years as a director of Greenpeace International. You founded this organization and then you left. Why were you one of the founders and why did you decide to leave?
I was one of the founders as doing a PhD in the late 60s, early 70s in ecology. I was radicalized by the Cold War and the threat of all-out nuclear war and the emerging consciousness of the environment, and we did a lot of good things. We stopped nuclear testing in Alaska, we stopped it in the South Pacific, we saved the whales, and we stopped a lot of toxic waste being put into the ocean and the air. But by the mid-'80s, we had gained a lot of notoriety, and we were bringing in a lot of money, and we were hijacked by the extreme left, who basically took Greenpeace from a science-based organization to an organization based on sensationalism, misinformation, and fear.
And they are militant, and so does this next generation is really militant about the environment. It's their number one issue. Here's what Greenpeace said about you. Moore does not represent Greenpeace. His statements have nothing to do with Greenpeace's positions. The new Green Deal resolution has the potential to create millions of family-sustaining union jobs that protect our nation's clean air, water, and communities. Your reaction?
Well, the fact is, you cannot do agriculture for 8 billion people, produce the food for 8 billion people without fossil fuels as far as we know it. We don't have an alternative, especially for transportation, which is over 90% dependent on fossil fuels. It's one thing to have a battery-powered vehicle for your family. It's another thing to try to get 40 tons of food at a time into the cities.
Yeah, right.
It's just not going to happen.
And Patrick, you also said if fossil fuels were banned, every tree in the world would be cut down for fuel for cooking and heating.
Absolutely. The fact is 85% of the world's energy is from fossil fuels, and the carbon dioxide that's being emitted from burning it was actually taken out of the atmosphere and the oceans millions of years ago and stored in sediments. We are now releasing it back into the atmosphere where it can fertilize the life on Earth. Carbon dioxide and water are the two main constituents of all life. Carbohydrates and of course fossil fuels are hydrocarbons, just missing the oxygen. But when you burn them, the oxygen is recombined with the carbon to form carbon dioxide. And people need to learn more about the chemistry because this is fake science and it is driving a very dangerous movement on the energy front.
And driving a whole political party. Patrick Moore, this is called climate change pushback. That's the other definition of it. Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for being here.
All right, let's hand it over to Jillian, who has some headlines for us.
And that's right. Good morning. Let's start off with this story. And a concern is growing among Democrats that a hard left turn will result in the re-election of President Trump. In an op-ed, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel writes, quote, "If Trump's only hope for winning a second term turns on his ability to paint us as socialists, we shouldn't play to type." Emanuel, who was chief of staff to President Obama, suggests ideas like the Green New Deal and Medicare for All could have a negative impact in 2020. Elizabeth Warren versus Facebook. The social media giant takes down the presidential hopeful's ads that called for breaking up tech giants. But now Facebook says it's changing course. A spokesperson telling media outlets, quote, "We removed the ads because they violated our policies against use of our corporate logo. In the interest of allowing robust debate, we are restoring the ads." Social Security could soon use social media to crack down on people trying to cheat welfare systems. President Trump's administration wants to use Facebook and Twitter to corroborate disability claims. That's according to the New York Times. So the rule could start as soon as next year, meaning if you say your back hurts, don't post pictures of you golfing, things like that.
You can only see it when the ice is thick enough.
Yep.
And this is that time. All right, Jillian, thank you very much. All right, not much ice here in New York City today because we had a lovely day yesterday in the 40s, but it's chilly again, Janice.
It is, yes. It's a little bit of taste of spring. Who wants to be on TV? All right, you came to the right place. Look at this. Is it spring break, my friends? Yes? All right, let's take a look at the maps and I'll show you. I mean, it's not too bad here in New York City. No maps. What is happening? Can you just look real pretty on TV for me? I will tell you across the country, we're going to be dealing with a storm system that's going to eject out of the Rockies, and that could bring us blizzard conditions and severe storms. So that's something we're going to be covering when we get our maps in gear. All right, hi. This is our cameraman, Ed, and he's going to take a picture of all you beautiful people that have come to Fox and Friends today. Thank you for coming from Wisconsin. Anybody from Texas? Right here. Does anybody like Steve, Ainsley, and Brian? Yeah. Oh, good answer.
Does anyone have a map of the country that we could borrow
today?
Does anyone have a cumulus cloud we can observe?
Can somebody call engineering?
That's all. Janice, if people need to know what's going on at their house, just look out a window.
Exactly.
Hello.
Exactly. She should not be telling everybody the weather. They should figure it out on their own. 18 minutes before the top of the hour. Airlines around the world
Investigators are working to try to figure out what caused Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 to crash just 6 minutes after takeoff, killing all 157 people on board, including 8 Americans. Many not involved with the investigation are pointing to the plane's model. It's the Boeing 737 MAX 8, because that is the same model plane that crashed in Indonesia just 5 months ago. Now more than a dozen airlines around the world are grounding their MAX 8s, but the FAA here in the United States says the planes are still airworthy. So what do you need to know? Here with his take is former FAA chief spokesperson Scott Brenner. Scott, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
Okay, so, when you hear the two stories about the two planes that crashed, you hear the first one went up and then it went down, went up, went down. Same thing happened to this, but the first plane had some equipment that wasn't working right?
That's correct. They had reports that one of the sensors that actually control the up and down pitch of the plane was not operating properly, and they allegedly had replaced it. So they had some data, and with that data, they were able to recreate the scenario, Boeing did, and so the FAA went out and said, all right, folks, if this happens, this other thing could happen to the plane, which would make the plane point the nose down on takeoff.
Right.
With the second crash, we just don't have any data. And the FAA is really a data-driven agency. Until we really know what happens and what caused this, I think the FAA is just going to continue to see and try and collect as much data as they can.
Scott, because this crash occurred in another country, is that going to mean that data collection is going to be more challenging?
Yeah, that's a great point. So we do have FAA investigators over there. We do have NTSB investigators over there, but they are just guests of the country. The countries themselves will run the investigation. So while we may want to get into it a little more deeper, we are still just guests. And so we may not have access to all the information. I think both these countries have excellent relationships with the U.S., so I think everybody's trying to figure out exactly what happened. But it's not as if the crash happened in the U.S., where NTSB would have primary jurisdiction, would be able to get into every level of detail that they need to figure out what happened.
Well, the FAA right now is saying that there's not a problem. And you look here in the United States, Southwest Airlines has 34 of the MAX 8s, and American Airlines flies 24 of them, a relatively new model. Scott, if you are booked on a MAX 8 today, would you feel absolutely safe about buckling up?
Yeah, I would actually. I mean, I still think aviation is by far the safest mode of travel that you can take. I think our pilots, U.S. pilots, are incredibly well trained, but especially now, I think everybody is acutely aware of what can happen on takeoff, and I think they're prepared to take the counter actions necessary to keep that aircraft in the sky.
All right. Well, it will be good to figure out what happened. Scott Brenner, former FAA chief spokesperson. Sir, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
You bet. All right. About 10 minutes before the top of the hour on this Tuesday, this woman risked her life to get a picture with a big cat. Is social media pushing people too far? That's the question, and that's coming up next. And New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio plans to combat climate change by instituting...
No, not worth it.
Well, while she is fortunate enough to share her story, the same can't be said for everyone snapping an edgy selfie or photo for social media. More than 250 people die while trying to take selfies between October 2011 and November 2017. Joining me now to weigh in is psychologist Dr. Jeff Gardere. Thank you,
it's
Dr.
a pleasure
Gardere, for
to
being
be back
here.
with you. Yes.
Always good to have you on. So are we going to just extreme measures? What are you... Obviously, it's dangerous, physically dangerous for her to lean over the fence. The Jaguar sliced her arm. She regrets it. But what is the danger in going to these extremes to post these pictures on Facebook? And
just the statistic you gave,
right.
That they put themselves in danger, that people actually die, and we're not learning the lessons from some of these folks. And I really do think a lot of this is about social media, getting more likes, getting more eyes onto whatever it is that you're posting, and therefore taking more and more unnecessary chances and challenges.
What did you think about her interview?
I thought it was a great interview because I think she's learned a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
She answered your question, was it worth it? Absolutely not. I just hope a lot of people pay attention to that. And thankfully, she has actually apologized to the zoo and feels in many ways, very badly about the negative publicity that it's brought to that zoo. And thank goodness they're not going to euthanize the Jaguar.
You know, as raising kids nowadays, we didn't have those issues. You always kind of raise your kids the way your parents raised you. But now with social media, I can't go to my mom and dad and say, how do I treat this? Or do I let my daughter do this or that? Because they don't have that experience in it. We're kind of learning as we go.
Yes.
People are posting pictures. They just want all these likes. You look at some people's lives and you think they have this wonderful life, and then you talk to them and they're suffering with the same issues that we all are.
I think in many ways, and I spoke with Brian offline about this, people are so caught up in just communicating only through social media and not talking to one another. Instead of living their best lives, it's about sharing it on social media and trying to get the reinforcement of others. And that's why they sometimes act out and do the crazy things that they do. I think we need to recenter ourselves and understand that we need to live for the moment in a very safe way. Certainly look at the things that are important to us and not just about getting that adrenaline rush of doing something different and exciting and letting other people see this life that we're living. It really is about taking care of ourselves.
Dr. Gardere, thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Coming up, Democrats divided. Nancy Pelosi says impeaching President Trump is not worth it, but other radical Democrats aren't happy about that. We are live in Washington with that story.